The knock was so soft that Ethan almost thought he imagined it, but the moment he heard it again, fragile, trembling, desperate, he felt a chill run through him. Midnight wasn't a time anyone visited his quiet home in Charleston, and it certainly wasn't a time for gentle knocks that sounded like the last attempt of someone ready to give up. He walked to the door with a strange weight tightening in his chest, and when he opened it, the world seemed to tilt. There she was, Lily. Standing under the cold glow of the porch light, her face streaked with tears, her hands trembling as though she had been fighting a storm only she could feel. Her eyes, wide and filled with fear, looked at him not as someone seeking shelter, but as someone silently begging not to break again. In that single moment, Ethan felt something inside him shatter and awaken at the same time. If you believe in kindness, compassion, and second chances, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support means the world to this channel and helps these stories reach more hearts. Ethan had known Lily for years. They weren't strangers, but they weren't lovers either, at least not in any way spoken aloud. They were the type of people whose lives kept crossing paths at grocery stores, community events, and church gatherings, the type who exchanged warm smiles and soft greetings that carried more emotion than words ever admitted. He always sensed a lingering sadness behind her gentle expressions, a quiet heaviness in her eyes, but he never knew the truth behind it. Tonight, however, the truth didn't need words. It was written on her face in the form of smeared mascara and trembling lips. She looked as though she had run until her heart gave out, and now all she had left was the strength to stand in his doorway. Every instinct in Ethan wanted to ask what had happened, but instead he simply stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. She didn't resist. She melted into him like someone who had been holding herself together for far too long and finally found permission to fall apart. He felt the soft pulses of her sobs against his chest, each one sounding like a plea she couldn't speak. The night outside was quiet, but inside Ethan's heart a storm was rising. He guided her gently inside, closing the door behind them, shutting out the darkness that seemed to chase her. Lily had always been known as a kind soul in their town, a quiet woman who smiled politely, attended Sunday service, and kept her head down. But people rarely asked about the loneliness hidden behind her calm demeanor. She worked long hours at a small bakery, gave most of her energy to helping others, and rarely took time for herself. She had been raised to believe that enduring pain was part of life, that keeping peace was better than starting conflict, even when silence suffocated her. Ethan knew these things about her in the same way people know the patterns of a season. They sensed it, but never truly saw the storm forming inside. Tonight revealed everything that had been hidden. While Lily sat shaking on the couch, Ethan quietly made her a cup of warm chamomile tea. He didn't speak, because something told him that she needed warmth more than words. When he handed her the cup, she held it with both hands, still trembling, still unable to look up. Slowly, she began to breathe a bit more evenly, and the storm inside her calmed just enough for her to find her voice again. She didn't give details, didn't share specifics, didn't name the shadows she had run from. Instead she whispered something that made Ethan's heart twist painfully. She said she had been holding too much, for too long, and tonight she realized she couldn't carry it alone anymore. Ethan understood that feeling too well. Life had its way of placing heavy stones in a person's heart until they forgot what freedom even felt like. He knew that loneliness could become a cage, that burden could make even the strongest soul crumble. So, he stayed by her side, letting her feel the quiet presence of someone who cared deeply, even if he never said it aloud. He didn't try to fix anything. He didn't pry into her pain. He simply offered the one thing she had been denied for far too long: safety. It wasn't until an hour later, when her breathing was steadier and her shoulders weren't trembling as violently, that Lily finally looked up, her eyes swollen and red. There was something vulnerable but determined in her gaze, something that spoke of survival despite the fear. She whispered that she hadn't meant to come here. She had driven aimlessly, ending up at his house without understanding why. But deep inside, Ethan already knew the answer. Sometimes the soul chooses what the mind won't admit. Sometimes people find their way to the hearts that feel like home. As the night stretched on, Ethan sat beside her while she unraveled pieces of her life she had never told anyone. She spoke of loneliness, emotional exhaustion, nights filled with silent tears, and years spent trying to be strong for everyone except herself. She described how she would smile softly in public but crumble behind closed doors, how she had kept hope alive even when it flickered like a dying candle. Ethan listened, not with pity, but with a deep ache in his chest because he saw her strength far more clearly than she did. Lily wasn't weak. She wasn't fragile. She was someone who had carried the weight of the world quietly, bravely, beautifully, until tonight, when she finally allowed herself to fall apart. As she spoke, something began to shift inside Ethan. He realized that caring for someone didn't always require grand gestures or heroic rescues. Sometimes it simply meant opening the door at midnight and offering your heart as a refuge. He saw the way Lily kept apologizing between breaths, as though her pain was an inconvenience. He noticed how she held her own hands, as if bracing herself for judgment he would never give. In those silent moments between her words, Ethan felt an overwhelming desire to protect her, not because she was helpless, but because she had been strong alone for far too long. By the time the clock struck 2 a.m., Lily was no longer crying. She looked exhausted, emotionally drained, but there was a softness in her expression now, an unspoken relief. Ethan gave her a warm blanket and told her she could rest in the guest room. She hesitated at first, looking conflicted, but eventually she agreed. As she walked down the short hallway, Ethan saw something subtle yet profound, a small flicker of hope returning to her eyes, as though she finally believed she was allowed to be cared for. That night, Ethan barely slept. He sat on the couch, staring at the dark window, reflecting on how life could change in a single moment. Lily's arrival was unexpected, but it didn't feel accidental. It felt like the universe had pushed her toward him because she needed someone who genuinely cared. And maybe, just maybe, he needed her too. He had spent years living a quiet, controlled life after losing his parents and going through lonely holidays at his big empty home. He had built emotional walls without realizing it. But tonight, Lily had walked right through them. When morning came, soft sunlight filtered into the house. Ethan made breakfast, unsure whether Lily would want to stay or leave. But when she stepped into the kitchen, her expression was different, still tired, still healing, but lighter. She thanked him with a sincerity that touched him deeply. She said she didn't know what would have happened if he hadn't opened the door. Ethan didn't respond with words, he just gave her a gentle nod, letting her know she never had to face the world alone again. In the days that followed, Lily found herself returning to Ethan's house often. Sometimes she came to talk, sometimes to sit quietly, sometimes just to sip tea and breathe without feeling judged. And each time Ethan welcomed her with the same warmth, the same steady presence that made her heart feel safe. Slowly, the emotional walls inside her began to crumble, not from weakness, but from finally realizing she didn't need them anymore. Their connection deepened in a way neither of them planned. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't forced. It grew in the quiet moments, in shared smiles, in gentle understanding. Ethan began to notice the way Lily's eyes sparkled when she felt comfortable. Lily began to notice the way Ethan's laughter softened the air in the room. They learned each other's stories, fears, hopes, and scars. And little by little, their hearts began intertwining. But healing isn't a straight line. There were days Lily retreated into silence, days where the shadows of her past tried to pull her back. But Ethan never left her side. He reminded her gently that healing took time, that she was allowed to have bad days, and that she didn't need to carry her burdens alone anymore. His consistency became her anchor, and her courage became his inspiration. As months passed, the midnight knock became a symbol, not of weakness, but of transformation. Lily often reflected on that night, realizing it was the moment she finally chose herself, the moment she allowed herself to seek help instead of pretending she was fine. She often told Ethan that knocking on his door had felt like stepping into a new chapter of her life, one filled with warmth, understanding, and unexpected love. One quiet autumn evening, as the sunset painted the sky in hues of gold and pink, Lily and Ethan sat on the back porch, wrapped in the soft glow of lantern lights. She leaned her head gently on his shoulder, feeling his steady breath beside her. It was in that moment she realized she no longer felt like a burden. She no longer felt like she was breaking. She felt safe, cherished, and seen. She whispered that she didn't know where life would take them, but she knew she didn't want to walk its path without him. Ethan simply held her closer, as though he had been waiting for that moment all along. Their story wasn't perfect, but it was real. Built on vulnerability, compassion, and the courage to open a door when the world felt too heavy to carry alone. Their love grew not from grand gestures, but from small moments where they chose each other again and again. If this story touched your heart even a little, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Your engagement truly helps these emotional stories reach more people who might need them. Before the ending, comment below, kindness can save a life. In the end, Lily often said that the night she knocked on Ethan's door wasn't the night she fell apart, it was the night she finally began to heal. And Ethan said that opening that door wasn't just an act of kindness, it was the moment he discovered the missing piece of his own heart. Sometimes life breaks us so we can be rebuilt stronger, and sometimes the person who opens the door becomes the person who changes everything. And as they walked forward into the future, hand in hand, hearts steady, fears fading, they carried with them the memory of that midnight knock that transformed two lives forever.